Well, I've been publishing reports since 2003 on the emerging major changes in global economics. First, I warned in particular about emerging instability in real estate lending and prices, also focusing attention on booming commodities like metals and oil, and also on a stock sector that rose over 1,600% from 2000 to 2010. This was in early 2003 when I was focusing on that stock sector and all the other things I mentioned. That stock sector was only up a few 100% at that time. It went on to rise over 1,600% in one decade. Remember, I was just mentioning the Dow Jones Industrial Average took 30 years to rise 1,600%. In the same decade that the Dow Jones Industrial Average did very little for 10 years, this stock sector rose 1,600%. Not as good as a 1 week gain of 1,600% like Jim Shepard produced prior to the stock market crash in 1987, or not prior to it, during it, through it. But 1,600% in a decade, hey, not bad. A lot of people thought 1,600% in 30 years was pretty good. So that's 2003. I started focusing on that stock sector, the emerging instability in real estate markets and real estate lending markets in particular, and the boom that had started in 99 or 2000 in oil and other commodities. In 2004, I wrote The Real U.S. Deficit, Oil, in which I first used the term the domino oil effect, and detailing why fuel prices would continue rising and how those spiking fuel prices would affect the U.S. economy in general, as well as specific things like stock prices and real estate prices. Many people benefited from reading that publication and acting in harmony with logic and math. But those most willing benefited much more than those least willing or least committed. Many others did not follow the recommendations and soon even went bankrupt by continuing to confidently gamble on finance real estate speculations, for instance. Next, in 2005, I wrote Worth Its Weight in Oil, in which I contrast the simple priority and functionality of fuels like gasoline over the inflated speculative bubbles in precious metals, real estate, and stocks. I compared the immediate functional value of gasoline. Right now, your tank is low. You're going to get it today. You're going to fill it up next week too, probably. The immediate functional value of gasoline I compared to the irrational exuberance about chunks of shiny metal or promises on paper, such as unfunded insurance policy guarantees or exclusive real estate titles enforced by the armed mercenaries of the local county court. I forecast that rising fuel prices would pop the credit bubble and reverse decades of discounting of currency, such as happened with the rebound in purchasing power of the Japanese yen that began in 1989. Many insurance policies didn't get paid in full. Many real estate properties lost huge amounts of purchasing power. And the currency of the yen dramatically increased in purchasing power, while Japanese stocks fell on average 75 or 80%. In other words, there was a five-fold increase in the purchasing power of the yen relative to the ownership of private companies in Japan. So note that to me, I mentioned insurance policies. Insurance policy promises to me are just credit. They're just promises, they're just accounts receivable for the beneficiaries or the creditors and accounts payable for the debtor. That's all. They're just credit. It's because no new money has been created to fulfill the immense contractual promises that insurance companies regularly tend to make in exchange for a few $100s of premium here and there. So a few $100 changes hands, the insurance company makes a $100,000 promise or a $750,000 promise or a $10 million promise or whatever it is. They have these immense liabilities. No new money has been created. It's just new accounts receivable and accounts payable. That's credit, and that's a really unusual thing that many people have, not made reference to. Honestly, I have, in all the research I've done over the last 9 years, I've really never heard anybody focus on the insurance industry's liabilities. I'm the only one I know who's done that. And I'm confident that other people have noticed that sometimes insurance companies don't pay what they promise they will pay, or sometimes they really seem to fight very hard to slow down payouts or even to contest claims. Maybe some of you have seen the movie Erin Brockovich, where an insurance company is systematically attempting to keep its purse strings really tight. In other words, attempting to minimize how much it has to pay out to people. So insurance companies' promises, that's all credit. There's nothing backing it, or there's nothing new backing it. When somebody, says, here's a few $100s of policy premium, there's nothing new backing the insurance company's promises. So however much money the insurance company had before, well, they just keep issuing new promises, new promises, new promises, and eventually that can be an issue, like it was for AIG in 2008. But beyond insurance companies, let's look at real estate prices. Those are really, really clearly primarily dependent on credit, as in borrowing. If you take out the real estate lending market, you pretty much took out the real estate market. The vast majority of real estate transactions are financed, and it's not 50% financing or 80% financing. Nowadays, you have, at least in residential real estate, a lot of 95 and 99% financed purchases, even 100% purchases, 100% finance purchases. So real estate prices are really dependent on credit. But also these insurance companies like AIG, they may have contracted themselves into huge liabilities in their mortgage insurance policies. This combination of the issue of real estate and just the general way of business that insurance companies use. So the mortgage insurance policies are promises by insurance companies to cover the payments to lenders in the event of a default by the debtor, by the borrower, by the person paying the mortgage, or the couple, or business, or whatever it is. So as the court officers resolve the immense difference between actual cash and the unfunded promises of debtors like insurance companies, the value of actual cash, the purchasing power, tends to rocket, as in the case of the Japanese yen in the last 2 decades. So a little bit more background. Since it is the armed mercenaries of court systems that enforce the value of cash, all secondary paper contracts tend to collapse in value during a credit deflation like that of Japan since 1989. Anything secondary to currency tends to collapse in value. Secondary paper contracts like real estate titles and insurance contracts, they also derive their value from the activities of the court officials. And in court, the primary functional paper contracts are never accounts receivable, but always are actual cash available. So the resolution of a secondary paper contract like an insurance contract, that's going to be cash. If you want the county officers, the mercenaries, to protect your real estate, you have to pay them. Or you may have to pay them. They may say, well, here's the cost of an eviction proceeding, and here's the cost of a 911 call. What is it that makes those responses by law enforcement free? Nothing. They're free as long as they're free until they charge otherwise. There's nothing really distinctive about government court systems from any other private protection system. The large size of really big bureaucracies is distinctive, but you're still relying on, it's not fencing, it's not walls, it's the armed mercenaries of the court that are going to actually enforce property rights. Or if it's not them, then they're the ones who are going to say, well, if you defend your property, then we're going to protect you from like legal repercussions. It won't be a crime for you to injure somebody who's trespassing and stuff like that. So it's all about the authority to use violence, which comes down to the court system's declaration and determination of who's authorized and who's not. So if they say, hey, we're gonna take this as part of a public domain confiscation of real estate, or for any other reason, well, they're the ones in charge. Why? Because they have the guns, and they are mercenaries in the whole organization to effectively execute their missions. So that's what's backing the currency. In Japanese yen, or in the euro, or in the US dollar, it's always the court systems that enforce the purchasing power of the currency. That's what the purchasing power of the currency is rooted in, is that enforcement activity, that armed mercenary operation. So when someone comes in with a claim or an insurance policy contract, or an eviction notice, or whatever it may be, cash is going to be the determining factor in resolving the vast majority of civil court proceedings. It's just all about cash. If there's enough cash available for paying court fees and for paying whatever contracts are validated by the court, or then that's what's going to determine the outcome. If the court says, oh, this qualifies for bankruptcy discharge, then again, cash is going to be a big issue. You have to pay the bankruptcy court for it to protect you. If you don't have any money, you can't file bankruptcy. Isn't that kind of weird? So, since it's the armed mercenaries of court systems that enforce the value of cash, all secondary paper contracts tend to collapse in value during a credit deflation like that of Japan since 1989. Real estate. So, secondary paper contracts include things like real estate titles and insurance contracts or policies. And they also derive their value from the activities of court officials. And in the courts, oh, I already read this. Okay. The primary functional paper contracts are never the accounts receivable, but always actual cash available. They're never credit. It's never credit available or accounts receivable or any of that stuff. It's actual cash available. That's the determining functional paper contract, is the cash. So by the way, just as Jim Shepard has extensive analysis available for free on the internet, so do I, including this presentation. However, analysis is not action. It's ironic, really, that I give such distinctive analysis and then say the following: understanding is optional. Really, analysis is available for free on the internet. There's a lot of it. Some of it's not very good. I've seen a lot of crappy analysis by so-called experts. They're very prominent. They're on TV or whatever, but they didn't forecast the real estate collapse. They didn't forecast the rising of oil prices. They didn't forecast the stock market crash. They didn't forecast the deflation of Japan in the last 21 years. They have no credibility to me, but lots of people may like them. That's fine. May follow them and get the consequences related to the adaptiveness of those actions that are recommended. Analysis, though, is not action. All the analysis in the world is just analysis. Action is what produces results. In fact, understanding is not required prior to taking relevant action. Someone doesn't need to understand why real estate markets were so mature, so susceptible to instability. They don't have to understand and do the math or think of the logic of wow, financing of real estate really is a big part of real estate transactions. And if there was a shift in the borrowing and lending trend, yeah, that would make a difference for real estate prices, probably, wouldn't it? Or yeah, supply and demand do matter when it comes to oil prices and gasoline prices. There's a lot of simple things, but somebody doesn't need to understand any of that stuff in order to take relevant action. I know that many people have been exposed to my research and foresight, but have not used it. Perhaps because they've not understood it completely. Fine. However, willingness to benefit may be much more adaptive than understanding, at least than understanding by itself. One person who understands can benefit many who may not understand yet or ever. So the understanding of people in general isn't that important necessarily. Their willingness to benefit, that could be important. Benefiting and understanding are quite distinct. How willing are you to benefit from what is changing? Jim Shepard has been willing to benefit. What about us? He had 60-fold increases in his recommendations, and all the people who followed his recommendations over the 29 years from 1982 till now. People who just buy and hold in Dow Jones Industrial Average, their gain so far was about a 16-fold increase. That could go down, that could go up, that could stay the same. But the willingness to benefit of someone like Jim Shepard is distinctive. Again, in 1987, he made more in a very short amount of time than the Dow Jones Industrial Average gain in 3 decades, and 30 years. 29 years, actually. So what about us? What about a stock sector that gains 1,600%? How willing are we to benefit from change, from what is changing? How willing, how committed are we to be one of those who benefit most? Contact me if you're willing to be one of those who benefit most from whatever is changing. One way is to reply to this blog post. That's one way to contact me. Thanks for your interest, and I wish you much prosperity as you adapt in accord with your willingness and commitment.